Hello, good morning everybody. I'm Barbara. I'm from Belgium, so I'm also supporting the Belgian team. I'm sorry, apart from the Polish, of course. So today I'll talk about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and LPS-induced inflammation. Let me just go. So small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is actually an increased number of bacteria in the small intestines. We normally see barely any bacteria, some lactobacilli maybe, but barely any other bacteria in the small intestines. And now we see anaerobic bacteria in the small intestines. So there's an increased number and there's an alternation of bacteria. So why is this subject included in a conference online today? It is because we over and over see, we more and more see an association between chronic pathologies and gut problems. So there's proof from certain studies that if you would treat the gut in, for example, fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, that you also see an improvement once you start treating the gut. Now this might be interesting because there's also an association in Lyme. We now know that over 65% of Lyme patients also test positive for SIBO. So this might be interesting to think about. So we start off with SIBO. There are some risk factors for SIBO. A lack of acidity is the first main risk factor. This can be because of a deficient production of gastric acid, or if you have a chronic use of medication like PPIs. A lack of acidity will cause a disbalance in the microbiome, causing SIBO. Another risk factor is any case in which we see dysmotility or really slow transit or digestion in the intestinal bowels. A third risk factor is the chance of developing SIBO after an acute gastroenteritis. So you have a 10% chance of developing a chronic SIBO problem. The main story on this one is all those people who come back from holiday and they say, oh, on my holiday I had such problems with different food and so on, but then afterwards when I came back, it never went back to normal, my digestion. So this is one of the possibilities where you would find SIBO. And then also very interesting for you treating or having Lyme and using antibiotics for a long time, this is a risk factor as well. Now, the symptoms are of course a full range of digestive complaints along with some systemic symptoms, but first of all we start with digestive problems. The first one is abdominal bloating. This is caused by the fact that you have anaerobic bacteria and they use fermentation to digest your carbohydrates. During fermentation, there is always a production of gases, and this will cause the bloated feeling you have. Next to this, we often see constipation or diarrhea, sometimes both, depending on which bacteria you have in the gut, and abdominal pain, of course. There are studies that tell us that more than 80%, I think, over 80% of people having irritated bowel syndrome do have SIBO. Other symptoms are related to hypochlorhydria, of course, the lack of acidity causing bloating, and there's elderly and vegetarians, they are most vulnerable for this. The other problem is malabsorption of different vitamins and nutritionals. For example, if you have low gastric acid, it's difficult to absorb iron and B12. But there's other things going on. For example, for the absorption of fat-soluble compounds, for example, vitamin A, vitamin D, E, and omega acids, you need conjugated bile acids. They are stored into your gallbladder and then released when you absorb fat-soluble compounds. Well, those conjugated bile acids, they are deconjugated by bacterial activity. So this causes a malabsorption of these kind of compounds. Now, the diagnosis is actually really easy and pretty cheap. I'm not sure whether it's available in Poland, so we can definitely try and figure that out for you. Diagnosis is based on the breath test, and this breath test is based on that fermentation of carbohydrates and the gases that come in production comes along with it. Now, everybody has some anaerobic bacteria in the large intestines. So, okay. There's well, let's see. You always have some anaerobic bacteria in the large intestines who are producing some gases. So that's normal. So we will exhale 20% of these gases, and this will be measured during the breath test. So how is it going? You have 12 hours of fasting, no intake of carbohydrates at all. Then you would have an intake of lactulose. This is your carbohydrate. During digestion, you will have one peak of gas because of this production of gas in the large intestines. But then a patient with positive SIBO will have 2 peaks. They will have production of gas in the small intestines and in the large intestines. So this gives you a proof of bacterial activity. Next to SIBO, there also is SIFO. This is small intestinal fungal overgrowth, and the most famous fungus or yeast is Candida. Now, the mechanism or the risk factors are mainly the same. There's the dysmotility, there's the lack of acidity, and the extended use of antibiotics. But next to this, we also find risk factors, for example, cortisone therapy or excessive stress. Now, the main problem in SIFO is the accumulation of one toxic compound. It is acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is the result when a yeast is digesting sugars. Now, acetaldehyde is neurotoxic. It will also damage the liver. It can bind to red blood cells, and this makes the red blood cell really stiff and makes it impossible for the red blood cell to release or deliver the oxygen, causing fatigue, for example. And what we also know, if you want to eliminate or convert acetaldehyde, you will need a lot of vitamin Bs. So if you have a lot of acetaldehyde, there is a depletion of vitamin Bs. The symptoms of C4 are brain fog because of the neurotoxicity, fatigue, but also you could see it on the white coating of the tongue. Not everybody has it, but it's really easy to see and to diagnose. Now, even further, we know that if you have an overgrowth of bacteria in the gut, this influences the permeability of your gut as well. And gut permeability is really important because this is the barrier between the gut, the intestines, and your blood circulation. So this barrier must be really strong. Now, there are some contributing factors to weaken the gut permeability. First of all, different bacteria, they can induce some genes that involve the barrier function, that weaken this barrier function. Secondly, it is really important that you have good tight junctions between intestinal cells, because if tight junctions are damaged, it is easier for unwanted bacteria or for undigested proteins, for endotoxins, for everything to migrate into your blood circulation. And then last but not least, there's IgAs. Those IgAs are part of the immune system in the gut. They are released into your intestinal fluid, and they are able to capture endotoxins and remove them without causing an inflammation. So this is how normally your gut immune system works. Now these soluble IgAs, if you lower them, if you have a condition in where they are decreased, it is a problem. Because, as I said before, if you have gut hyperpermeability, you have the possibility of undigested proteins, of LPS, of toxins, unwanted bacteria, anything can enter into blood circulation. A little bit more specific on LPS, because I mentioned it before. LPS is actually the residue when your normal microbiome dies off. So the normal bacterial flora dies off and LPS is left over. This is very normal, but your body must be able to eliminate this. If your body is not able to eliminate LPS, you get an increase of LPS into blood circulation, and once we have a 2- or 3-fold increase, we call it metabolic endotoxemia. So, at this time, we have LPS, it's like an endotoxin, getting into blood circulation. Here, it can interact with certain toll-like receptors, toll-like receptor 4. And toll-like receptors are very important because they are the activators of the innate immune response. So this is what's happening. LPS interacting with the toll-like receptor, and the innate immune response is activated by releasing a lot of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Just to show you how inflammation exists, you have 10 different kinds of toll-like receptors. The toll-like receptor 4, all the way on the other end, is what we're discussing now, but this is actually also the explanation on how a bacteria like Borrelia can cause inflammation, because Borrelia, for example, it will activate toll-like receptor 1 and 2. This is how it works. Now, once you have toll-like receptors activated, there's two things, mechanisms that are going wrong. So, LPS-induced inflammation can have a metabolic effect. This means a study has been done actually where you would inject a mice with LPS, and then both mice would get exactly the same diet, but one of those mice injected with LPS becomes really, really thick and fat, and the other one doesn't. So this is how we see what the effect of LPS-induced inflammation can be. It can cause body weight gain, it can cause insulin resistance, it can also cause dyslipidemia. So you would see in blood labs, you would see really high levels of triglycerides and then really low level of HDL, because HDL is able to neutralize LPS. I don't know what's happening. Because HDL is neutralizing LPS and you will need a large amount of it, so HDL will decrease eventually. The second mechanism of LPS-induced inflammation is an inflammation not in the body but also in the brain. So neuroinflammation is a result of microglial activation, and this can be triggered, for example, by LPS. So to summarize it all, if we have SIBO, problem of overgrowth in the bowel, this is a risk factor for gut hyperpermeability. Now the gut hyperpermeability makes it easier for LPS and unwanted bacteria to get into circulation and causing inflammation on different levels, neuroinflammation or metabolic problems. Now, one of the solutions then for neuroinflammation is LDN. It is a low dose of naltrexone. I don't know why it switches sometimes, I'm sorry. It's a low dose of naltrexone. And why this can be interesting is because we know low dose naltrexone has an antagonistic effect on the toll-like receptor 4, which was activated by LPS. So this will be able to reduce neuroinflammation in all different, I don't know So this will be able to reduce neuroinflammation in different situations, but also in LPS-induced inflammation. LDN is really unique on its own because we don't know a lot of other compounds that can do this, so it might be a new example of a new therapeutic agent. Then, back to SIBO, because that was the main problem. Back to SIBO, that was the main problem. We will have to restore the acidity in the gut. We will have to increase acidity. You can do this by adding diluted gastric acid. The easiest way is to work with a solution, because then you can use drops and everybody can choose for himself how many drops they use. You would add the gastric acid because it is very important in restoring the pH of the gut. It would also disinfect your food. I don't know why. It would also disinfect your food, and it will increase. He's really doing things on his own. It will disinfect your food, and it will start off the digestion of your further activation of your digestion. Then, digestion is very important, so we will have to eliminate everything that causes inflammation. For example, gluten, casein, and proteins, so big proteins. And then last but not least, there's glutamine. Glutamine, which is actually the fuel for your intestinal lymphocytes, so it is the one that will rebuild this EGA barrier, this really important barrier in the gut. It is very important not to take too high doses of glutamine because it gets converted into glutamate, which is actually neurotoxic, and it also gets converted into ammonia, which will disbalance the pH or the acidity of your gut again. So glutamine in a small dose, but just really targeted release. You need it to be in the gut and not in the stomach. Secondly, it's really important to eliminate the pathogens, and you have two options. You can use antibiotics, or you can use herbal treatments, or you can even combine them. For SIBO, the commonly used antibiotic is rifaximin, 200 milligrams 3 times a day. It has great advantages because it doesn't have any systemic absorption, so it's really safe. It will only work for bacteria, of course, and mainly if we see hydrogen-positive situations from the breath test. Or most often, those are the people who complain about diarrhea. In other cases, in constipated predominant situations, there's possibility to use neomycin or metronidazole, or you could even combine them in people having hydrogen and methane positive testing. Natural treatment is also a possibility. We could use allicin, which is an antibacterial. It is activated garlic as a compound. You could use oregano, which is actually an antifungal, and monolarin, which is derived from coconut and will break down biofilm, so it's a biofilm breaker. These can be combined in one product, and you would use it at least for 2 months. Other possibilities are to use herbal drops. You would use combinations, and often it is very interesting in these cases to do cycles, because every time you do a cycle and then you give them a break for 36 hours, this allows the bacteria to activate again, but then it's more vulnerable, and then you attack again. So these are really protocols to follow. Oh, good. We're almost at the end. Not too fast. Okay. And then, if you would, it's very interesting to use cycles in SIBO treatment, because you would use it for example, 12 days, and then in case of rifaximin, the rest of the month you wouldn't do anything. But this gives you also time to restore the gut by giving them probiotics. So most interesting probiotics are soil-based probiotics. They are actually spore formers who are resistant to gastric acid, and they can survive the stomach. Once they get into the intestines, they will colonize and grow really easily. The other advantage of those products is that they are not milk-derived, because so many people having SIBO really have intolerance to milk as well, so it's a great advantage. Often, as I said before, often there's multiple rounds of treatments that are necessary. You can choose between herbal treatment, the antibiotics, or even combine them. But then there's other things that you must think of. For example, there are some things that you can add to treatment also to ensure that they don't show relapse. The prokinetic medication is very interesting here because the dysmotility was such a problem. Prokinetics are LDN as well, ginger, 5-HTP. We have a lot of receptors for serotonin in our bowel, promoting bowel movement. And then iberogast, which is actually a combination of different herbs. Probiotics. Diet, of course, people will have to think about their diet because you cannot add, for example, if you have intolerances, you must really think of this. Then I want to talk really quickly about SIBO because it mainly has the same protocol here. You would also use the gut protocol just to restore pH and microbiome in the gut, diluted gastric acid, enzymes for digestion, and the coated glutamine. Of course, antifungal therapy, there's two possibilities. Fluconazole for 4 weeks. You would add liver support in this one because it's pretty strong on the liver. And nystatin is the other possibility. Nystatin has also the advantage that it doesn't get systemically absorbed, so it's really low in side effects. Natural treatments are also possible here. You could combine or could use the oregano here, or caprylic acid, or a protocol using different herbs in cycles as well. Very important, as we said before, you will need a lot of vitamin B's to break down the acetaldehyde, the toxic compound, which was produced by Candida. So you would have to add a vitamin B complex, a good vitamin B nutrition support. To wrap it all up, to put everything together, SIBO is very common in multi-infectious chronic pathologies. Often SIBO causes gut hyperpermeability, which influences the translocation of LPS from the gut into circulations, and this will cause a lot of systemic metabolic and neuroinflammation. And then the solution is to repair the gut, to make sure that you get an elimination of the pathogens, and that you will eliminate inflammation as well. So this is just